Hello and welcome to another episode of Anfield Watch. Today we're going to be talking about Ibrahima Konate's contract situation and a little bit of Hugo Ekitike, and maybe we'll get a mention of even Michael Olise at the end. To do that, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by French football expert Robin Bairner. Robin, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to make my debut here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. So to begin with, the main topic of conversation right now, because of the international break at Liverpool, is Konaté's contract situation. Obviously, Liverpool fans are probably haunted by what happened last year with Mohamed Salah, Virgil van Dijk and Trent Alexander-Arnold. And now it feels like we're in the same boat again with Konaté. He's got 1 year left on his contract. It seems like Real Madrid are interested. But obviously, we know this is the main headlines in Liverpool. Is it a leading headline in France at the moment?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily a leading headline in France. I mean, there's definitely interest about it because Konaté has become a more influential figure in the national team. He's recognised as a starter in there. So he's definitely a character that the French media are interested in and care about. But equally, it's quite a funny situation because despite his status and growing status in the national team, there's not a whole lot of exclusive news from French journalists, shall we say, in terms of his contract situation. A lot of the French media outlets are just parroting what's coming out of Spain and Marca in particular, which is obviously saying that Konaté seems destined to sign for Real Madrid. But there's no actual sources in France leading us to believe that that's going to be the situation. And of course, the French know very well, just as Liverpool fans do, how powerful Real Madrid can be in terms of drawing free agents to the Bernabeu. We saw a couple of years ago that they obviously did this with Kylian Mbappe before they did it with Trent Alexander-Arnold. So the French are very well versed in how Real Madrid work as a club in this sort of situation, but they're not explicitly saying themselves that this is happening. And I think that's quite interesting too, because quite often you see the Spanish media and particularly the big sources like Marca go hard early in terms of these stories. And they got it wrong last year with regards to Alphonso Davies. Obviously, he was expected to go to Real Madrid as a free agent, but that fell through. So, there's definite scope for this not happening, despite the early indications that it will.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned that because all the Liverpool sources are pretty much sitting on the fence as well at this stage. So, do you think it is a good sign for Liverpool fans anyway that the French media are not going hard on it, and it's only the Spanish media at the moment who are really pushing this?
Yeah, I have to say I don't necessarily trust the Spanish media a whole lot on this one. It's certainly, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that Real Madrid will be interested in Konaté as a free agent. I think the fact that he's not signed a new contract at Liverpool should be seen as a worrying sign, and it does point to the suggestion that he could go to Real Madrid. But equally, we saw last year with the case of Van Dijk and Salah that not having signed a contract at this stage of the season isn't necessarily a disaster for Liverpool. So I think while the signs are there that it could happen, I think the Spanish media have perhaps gone a little bit too hard too early on this to say that it will. However, I don't have any insider information in this particular case, and this is just me speaking from my experience of having monitored the Spanish media over the course of the last sort of 15, 20 years. They do tend to get very excited very early about this sort of thing.
In terms of Konaté, obviously there is quite a strong French contingent at Real Madrid at the moment. How much do you think Real Madrid in itself is already a big appeal for any player, but with that French cohort in Real Madrid, how much of that could influence his decision?
Yeah, I don't think there's too much doubt that, having so many players that he knows there could undoubtedly have an impact on what he decides to do. But, that doesn't necessarily need to be a positive impact, because we saw last November he's got a good relationship with Kylian Mbappe, which you would expect would draw him to Real Madrid if anything. But I don't think that necessarily needs to be the case in this circumstance, because he said last November, when Mbappe was kind of struggling to settle in at Real Madrid and, finding it difficult in terms of off-field issues that he was having at the time, and the criticism he was getting from the media, he said that he wanted Mbappe's footballing ability, but he didn't necessarily want his life. Now, Ibrahima Konate is never going to be a world star like Kylian Mbappe is. He's probably not going to be trailed by the media to the same degree as Mbappe is. But, just putting yourself into that situation of being in Real Madrid and, being the centre of the focus for the whole Spanish media, that puts additional pressure on you. And it'll be interesting to see whether that's something he's willing to embrace, because it sounds like he's kind of satisfied with his situation at Liverpool at the moment, doesn't necessarily want to throw himself into the public spotlight like Mbappe has. The fact that the Tchouaméni and Camavinga there might help shield him a little bit and help him to settle, but that didn't seem to have a huge positive effect on Mbappe. So it'll be interesting to see how this kind of plays out in the months ahead, because, as I say, although Mbappe is there, I don't necessarily think that this will be a decisive factor for Konaté making a decision to go to Real Madrid.
So this is not a Jude Bellingham, Trent Alexander-Arnold situation, because I was kind of concerned at the international break, because Konaté did actually bring up Mbappe and Real Madrid in an interview where he sort of joked that Mbappe calls him every day to come to Real Madrid. Obviously, I think that was said in a little bit of jest. There was some humour to it. The context is important, but for Liverpool fans, I think that is always a worry after what happened last year.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. He did mention Mbappe, and he did say that Mbappe calls him every 2 hours to make him move to Real Madrid. But equally, I don't necessarily see him as being that sort of character that would be drawn to that. We have seen Real Madrid employ these tactics, the sort of secret agent tactics, if you like, of getting their players to talk others into making a move. But equally, the Spanish media do love to talk this thing up as well, because the whole Trent Jude thing was obviously big last year, but they're huge friends. Mbappe and Konaté do seem to be friends, but they don't seem to be quite as tight as that. But equally, the Spanish media are also talking about Jude Bellingham now, moving on to talking Erling Haaland into a move to Real Madrid next summer for Manchester City. So I think what you can do is take this with a little bit of a pinch of salt. I'm sure Kylian Mbappe would love to play with Konaté at club level. He's described him as a beast before, and he's praised his personality and loves his leadership and sort of outspokenness and willingness to be a leader in the locker room. But equally, I don't think it's going to be necessarily decisive.
Back to let's talk about a bit of on-field matters. Obviously, as you mentioned, Konaté is now a key starter for France. In the English media, there's a lot of debate about who's better, William Saliba or Ibrahima Konate. Is there any conversations in the French media about the two of them? And is there a consensus in French media about who is the better one?
Yeah, I'm afraid I think the consensus in France is that Saliba is the better player. He tends to be the one who's played in his preferred position in defence. But when he's not played, Konaté is now starting to become very much seen as the sort of backup, the second choice, the second best, if you like. He turned in a couple of really solid performances in the past couple of World Cup qualifiers. He's played as a left-sided centre-back for France in the past, which hasn't necessarily helped him. He got shunted across to the right and on this occasion with Upamecano on his left, and he looked much more reassured in the whole. So, he is a player whose star is rising, I think. I don't think Saliba, despite his performances in the Premier League, has shown quite that level for the France national team yet. So there's definite scope for for Konaté to take that sort of coveted top centre-back spot from Saliba, even if the Arsenal man is, for the moment, regarded as the superior player in France.
Moving on from Konaté, there's obviously another French Liverpool star, now also playing in the French senior national team. Hugo Ekitike didn't get too many minutes during the international break, but he did make his debut for France. What has been the sort of media attention towards him, obviously being a debutant, and also the way he started his Liverpool career as well? It's very rare that a Liverpool forward scores 3 goals in his first 3 games for the club.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it'd be wrong to describe it as surprise because, Hugo Ekitike has been billed as such a big talent in France for many years now. And then obviously moved to Paris Saint-Germain, saw his development stall, and before moving to Germany. But there's a lot of French players that do quite well in Germany. Ekitike ultimately excelled, and that's why he got such a big move to Liverpool. But it's only really been since he moved to Liverpool that this sort of spotlight's fallen on him, if you like. Because so many French players do tend to do rather well in the Bundesliga, and because he hadn't been called up to the French national team before then, it almost felt like he was somebody that the French media was aware of, but wasn't necessarily paying a whole lot of attention to, despite having such an impressive scoring record. So now that he's moved to Liverpool, there's no doubt that his status in the media has had a significant jump, and obviously scoring 3 goals already has only increased that. And yeah, for sure, I think he's on track to become the next big offensive star. But French football have got so many good quality attacking players, it's kind of difficult to muscle your way into that group, but he's definitely doing that now.
Well, that kind of leads me into my next question, because I was going to mention the stacked talent that French football has in attack. How does Hugo Ekitike even fit into a starting 11 that has Kylian Mbappe, Ousmane Dembele, Desiree Doué, Michael Olise? I mean, the list just goes on and on. There's so much talent. How does he even have a chance of being in the starting 11?
Well, the answer is he hasn't been a part of the starting 11 yet. Basically, brutally, he only got 10 minutes over the course of the international break, which kind of shows you where French football's at with its attacking quality. And I think he's going to find it difficult to break in and really earn significant minutes in the national team, at least initially. But, from a Liverpool perspective, that's probably quite a good thing, because it means he's not going to be exhausting himself, and he's less likely to get injured. The French FA has been criticised by Paris Saint-Germain this week because both Desiree Doué and Ousmane Dembele were injured on international duty and now face a couple of months out. So, this is an issue that Liverpool will hopefully dodge in this regard with Ekitike, because there are so many quality players in that France team. Ryan Cherki is another one that you missed out, who could potentially play up front and on the wing. But where exactly Ekitike fits in is a tricky one, because you've got Olise on the left wing, you've got Mbappe, who now seems to be more settled playing as a centre forward. Arne Slot had suggested that Ekitike could play out on the left for Liverpool, so he could fill that role for France for sure. For me, he's more naturally a centre forward, but that means displacing Kylian Mbappe, and Mbappe is a player who loves to play all the minutes for France, so it's going to be complicated for him to get into the France national team. But he's still only 23 years old. He's got a huge future there. There's plenty of time for him to make his mark on the international scene. I think I remember reading the other day that at 26 years old, Virgil van Dijk only had something like 14 or 16 caps. So, there's still ample time for him, and I'm sure his time will come at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, as I mentioned, we were going to talk about Olise as well. There's been a little bit of buzz on social media. I think some outlets have picked it up as well, that he supposedly has a release clause that I think is active in 2027 or 2026. And apparently Liverpool are one of his suitors. he's sort of seen as a replacement for Mohamed Salah. Do you think, can you see that? Could Olise be the replacement for Salah when in a year or 2 years' time he eventually does decide to move on from Liverpool?
Well, I mean, I have to say that I've been, hugely impressed with what Olise has done at Bayern Munich. I knew he was a good player, but I don't think I appreciated just how good he was. And, he's really stepped into this, to the breach in France, and been really impressive. But luring players away from Bayern Munich is one of these things that's it's a difficult thing because they pay such big wages. Are Liverpool willing to match that? If he is going to come in as a Salah replacement, if you like, then they surely will be prepared to go big on him and splash out, which means it's possible. I haven't seen the reports of the release clause, to be honest, so I'm not sure how much money in terms of initial outlay that Liverpool would have to pay, for example, but it was certainly an interesting one, and from all the signs that Olise has shown over the last couple of years, he certainly seems a player who is equipped to step up and play for any team in the world, and obviously that includes an absolutely stacked Liverpool attack. And we've talked about France's stacked attack, Liverpool's attack's absolutely stacked too. But I think Olise could absolutely fit in there. A very, very exciting player, and one I personally had underrated until recently.
So it's fair to say in the French media they're not really discussing Olise to Liverpool just yet.
It's not one that's been mooted yet in the media that I've been aware of, that's for sure. But it's one to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. Well, Robin, thank you for your time. If the listeners, watchers want to sort of keep up to date with your work, where can they find you?
So you can find me at footballtransfers.com and also on X or Twitter at @rbairner.
Yeah, I definitely recommend everyone to check Robin out and his work on football transfers as well. All the links will be in the description below. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.